Well, good morning, Momentum. My name is Matt Nickerson. I've been here last year. I was actually here, and then I've spoken at one of your events. And actually, I'm wearing that T-shirt underneath today. Yeah, I know, right? Just so happened. It was really cold in Ohio. So anyway, super glad to be here back with you. The way this came about is I was visiting my family. I'm from Northeast Ohio. My parents live in Talmadge. I graduated from Talmadge High School. My sister lives in Wadsworth, and I was just coming back. And I know I've got a bunch of friends in the area, and I'm like, hey, if you need a Sunday off, I'm in town. Let me know if I can help. So that's how I ended up here. And I'm super excited to be here with you guys. I love this church. I love to watch you guys from afar. I love seeing what God is doing in all of you, and I really think you got one of the good ones in Dan. And so make sure you encourage the heck out of that guy. But anyway, we started talking, and he said, hey, what do you want to preach on? And I said, God has put this on my heart. So I've been going over your head, praying for you. I think God's got a message for somebody specific here today, maybe lots of you. I think there'll be a nugget for everybody, but I think there's a couple people this is really for. So how many of you guys are Lion King fans? Lion King? All right. Now, I'm not talking about that, new modern CGI voiceover, whatever they call that thing. I'll talk about the original cartoon 90s version. How many of you are fans of that one? Yes. And hands down, the greatest character in the entire movie is... I disagree with all of you. I used to like Momentum. It's Pumbaa. Come on, you can have the big pig too. So Pumbaa, though, when he's talking to the lion, who I'm drawing a complete blank on his name, Simba. He's talking to Simba, and he says this great line. You may remember this. You know, kid, it's times like this, my buddy Timon here says, you got to put your behind in your past. You remember that? And then, of course, Timon corrects him. I was like, no, you got to put your past behind you. But this is such a great little line, right? Because what I want to talk to you today is, how do I put my behind in the past? How do I put my past behind me? How do I actually do that? So let me start with this question. Is there anything in your past that has you stuck? Maybe it's a sin or a struggle or a mistake you made years ago, and you still carry the guilt and the shame around from what you did. Or maybe it's somebody else's sin or guilt that they did, and you've been carrying around the bitterness and the unforgiveness and the pain of that. Or maybe it's something, you made a decision. It wasn't even right or wrong. It was just a decision. But that decision impacted the people you love the most. And you've been carrying around this sense of, I don't know how to fix this for a while now. Look, there's no way in 35 minutes that I'll probably take a couple more. But there's no way that I'm going to resolve all of that for you in 35 minutes. But what I want to do is give you some paths, some hope, and some things that you might do that might bring about change in you. So let me start with a story from somebody in my church. I got an email from a couple, and the email just said, can you talk about how to deal with infertility? I thought that's a legit question, and so I looked at the messages coming up, and there was nowhere in the next 6 months that are really good. And I wrote back to them, I don't see anywhere that's coming, Maybe it'd be good for us to sit down and talk about it one day. And we didn't get to do that, and they wrote back later, and they asked me again, and I looked again. There really wasn't anywhere that was just coming up. I didn't want to just randomly grab a sermon, but again, they needed to talk to somebody. So we scheduled a time to sit down and talk, and we cried together. We met for almost 3 hours. And I got to hear their painful story. They got married, and they've been desperately trying to get pregnant. And these are extremely gifted and qualified people, and God's just not doing it. So they're jumping through all the medical hoops. They're going through all the things. They're getting all the tests. They're trying all the procedures and all the things that they felt like they could do and should do. And over and over and over again, it's no, it's no, it's no. And so after that happened for a while, there was a lot of finger pointing and anger, and it's your fault, and if you had it or we. And then when they're sitting with the pastor, they start to say things like, why is God doing this to us? And see, that's what can happen in our story. So I'm convinced, and you can feel free to disagree with me, but I'm convinced that we are at the apex of the word shame having a new meaning in our culture. So the way psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors use the word shame isn't necessarily the way the Bible uses the word shame. Now, I think you see the concept in the Bible. Let me express all that to you in a second. You're like, what are you talking about? Well, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, they'll tell you today that shame is that sense that you have that something's wrong with me. I'm not good enough, I don't measure up, I'm unloved or unlovable. And that comes from any number of circumstances. Now, the Bible talks about shame a little differently. The Bible talks about shame and says that shame comes from something you should feel for previous actions that you're embarrassed about. You feel shame, and that's not a bad thing. Counselors say, no, that's guilt. And so what I think is going to happen if things don't change in the next 10 years, you'll actually see Bibles using a different word when it comes to that word shame because culture uses it differently. And that's totally fine. That's how language evolves over time. And if that bores you, I like to say things like that because I like for you to understand what's happening when Bible translators are updating the Bible into modern language. They're not changing what it said. They're trying to help bring meaning to what the original Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic was. Now, some of you are going to eat that up or you're like, move on already. Okay, but here's what I am convinced of. Shame comes from things we've done or things others have done to us. And what happens when we feel shame is we feel like we aren't enough. And when we feel like we aren't enough, the question is, who will we turn to? And will we turn to God? Now, I want to take you to a story in the Bible of a guy named Jacob. If you don't know the history of this guy, it's going to be a little bit important to get it. So Jacob is the grandson of a guy named Abraham. He had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I'm one of them, and so are you. So thank you. Right arm. Okay. You have to have grown up in the church to know what I just did, and if you didn't miss out on anything. I promise you. Okay. So we have Abraham. He and his wife have one son, Isaac, who then has two sons, Jacob and Esau. And when Jacob and Esau come out, they're twins, but they don't look anything alike. Esau is very hairy. In fact, that's kind of what the word Esau means. Jacob means something else. In fact, let me show you the verse. Genesis 25:26 says this. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to him. Rebekah's the mom, Isaac's wife. I don't know how old she was, but God bless him if she was close. Okay, so what we do know here is the word Jacob, the reason I highlighted it, is because Jacob means the one who grabs the heel. How would you like to be named that? Well, it's probably just as bad as hairy. So Esau means hairy, and Jacob means the one who grabs the heel. But here's the thing. This is often true in many languages, but especially in Hebrew and even in Greek, but really in Hebrew. While that's what the name means literally, it has another implication. So one who grabs another's heel, I want you to think of a football player, right? And he's trying to chase down the other guy, and at the last second, he can't make the tackle. He dives, and he swipes at his foot, and he hits his heel. What happens to the guy? He trips him. And in that way, Jacob's name becomes prophetic about who Jacob is. Jacob is a deceiver. That's what his name literally means or implies. Now, what I want you to see is I want you to see Jacob's shame. So in verse 27, it says this. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, that's dad, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Do you ever read things like that and you're like, wow, I can relate with that? If you have any siblings, you may know what it's like. I have 3 sons. They'll be here at the next service, and all of them know which one is my favorite. It's whichever one I'm talking to in that moment, or whichever one does what I ask it to. No, I'm kidding. But if you have any family drama, the Bible is so real. If you ever thought the Bible was boring, you just weren't reading the right parts. It's so good. This story is so intense. But what I want you to see in this is this. Jacob's entire identity at this point was wrapped up at being mommy's boy, not good enough for dad, and known as the deceiver. And he's living out that identity. In fact, over the next few chapters in the book of Genesis, we see 2 different stories where Jacob deceives his brother. So Esau's slightly older because he came out first. They're twins. But what happens in the story is really important. So there's 2 different things that happen. I'll give you the quick background if you want to know more. I heard somebody say, he talks fast. You have no idea. Okay, so this is slow. Okay, so there's something called the birthright and the blessing. The birthright goes like this. So if you had 2 sons, daughters were not included. If you had 2 sons, they would divide the inheritance. But the way they would divide it, let's say there were two, is you would add a third brother who doesn't exist. The oldest brother would get 2 portions, called a double portion, and the younger brother would get 1 portion. So he gets 2/3. But same thing if you have 3 brothers. You add a fourth one. He gets double, and the numbers keep going. In this case, there were 2 brothers. So it was Esau's to get a double portion. Now, what he's to do with that money is he's to watch over the family. He becomes the patriarch, where dad either can no longer be or dies, right? Either way, physically can't or he dies. And so it's the brother's job to use those resources to care for everybody else, to watch out for everybody else. Even though brother's going to take his own portion, have his own family, his own life. If there were daughters or others, it'd be his job to make sure they're safe. But here's the thing. Jacob one day tricks Esau into giving him the birthright. And the way he does this, Esau is out hunting. He comes back. He's famished, it says. And so Jacob has some stew going. He knew what was going to happen. And so when Esau comes in, he's like, oh, brother, give me some of that stew. And Jacob goes, no, but I'll trade you for the birthright. And Esau goes, what is a birthright good to me when I'm going to die? I'll never get to see it. So he trades him the birthright. But really what Jacob did is he deceived him. He didn't look out for Esau's best interest. He knew what was going on. He knew Esau would be out there hunting, and he planned on it. The next one is a little bit more intense, and that has to do with the blessing. So the blessing was given to Abraham. God said to Abraham, I'm going to make you the father of many. You're going to have more children than there are stars in the sky or sand on the shores. And more importantly, through you, all nations will be blessed. We know as Christians today that pointed forward to Jesus, to Messiah. So that one day, now, how are we all brothers and sisters of everybody in the faith for thousands of years? Because of Jesus. So Jesus was the fulfillment of the promise. But this was bigger than the birthright. Because this is God saying to Abraham, to Isaac then, and now to Esau, you are going to have a significant part in God's plan. So Isaac one day, he knows he's getting near his deadline. He's going to die. And so he says, Esau, go out, find me my favorite game, wild game, and bring it in, make me a meal, and then I'll give you the blessing. And so he goes out, and when Rebekah, mom, hears that, she goes to Jacob. She says, Jacob, go get me an animal, bring it in here. I'm going to make your dad a meal he really loves. We're going to put your brother's clothes on you. We're going to put animal skin on your arm, because remember, brother's name is Harry. And so we're going to put animal skin on your arm, and you're going to go receive the blessing from dad. What's he doing? He's going to deceive his dad and trick and steal not only the birthright, but also the blessing from his brother. And he does that. We're going to read some of this. I don't have this for a slide for you, but Genesis 25, verse 29, if anybody is following along and enjoys this kind of stuff. Once, when Jacob was that's the wrong one. I'm sorry. We go to the other one. 27, verse 22. Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, the voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he proceeded to bless him. Are you really my son Esau? He asked him. I am, he replied. Then he said, my son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing. Jacob brought it to him, and he ate. He brought him some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went in to kiss him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him, and he said, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. Who is he really blessing? It's not Jacob, it's Esau. Man, what is it like, as some of you know, to sit in the presence of this person that you desperately want to approve of you, and you can't seem to get their approval? He goes on. He says, may God give you heaven's dew and earth's riches, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. And those are the words that Abraham gave to Isaac, and Isaac now gave to Jacob. Powerful, powerful stuff. But what is it like to receive a blessing intended for your brother? Well, what happens is Esau comes in, he figures out what his brother did, and he is livid. And he's a hunter. He's the hairy, athletic one, not like Jacob, mama's boy, who stays inside cooking with mom. And so what happens is when mom catches wind that Esau said, I'm going to kill my brother when dad has passed and the grieving period is over, I'm going to kill him, mom goes to Jacob and says, you need to run to your uncle, my brother, you need to run, you need to get there, you need to meet a woman there, you need to marry a woman there, you need to get out of here until your brother's calmed down, and then you can come home. And so that's basically how the story goes next. Jacob leaves to get away from brother to be able to go meet a wife and go to a different part of his story. And what I want to do is bridge off that for a minute, come back to our story before we come back to his story, and just say this. I think what we're starting to see in him is something that we could take away for ourselves. So no matter what else you get out today, you might need to get this one. And here's a little, a little formula. You might want to write this down, but your next tattoos. You can always look down and see this, right? Right here on your arm. Ready? Here's the formula. Change of place plus change of pace plus change of people equals change of perspective. That's a lot of P's. I realize that. Change of place plus change of pace plus change of people equals change of perspective. Let me walk through each of these quickly. Again, be a whole sermon in and of itself. Let me just walk through these quickly. Change of place. So if you're stuck and you can't get out of something, you can't figure out how to deal with it, sometimes you need a new start, a new beginning. The Bible often calls this repentance. In the book of Isaiah, God says, look, I'm doing a new thing. I think that's from me stepping. God got your attention, didn't he? He's like, I'm going to step back. I think that's the problem. My mic is feedbacking into the microphone. Okay, so sometimes you need a change of place. A gentleman in my church, he was working on getting sober, and one of the things he discovered was he would always start off well, work hard, have a good day, but he would drive the same route home, and the same bar he would stop out and tend to just stop and say hi to his buddies and have one drink, maybe two max, and then he'd be coming home at 11 o'clock, completely wasted. And the problem is he had to start driving a different way home. He needed to stop staying in the same pattern. He needed a new pattern to create a new perspective. That's not everything, though. So change of pace, change of pace. Most of us are running way too fast. I don't mean literally. Most of us are going way too fast or way too hard. We overcommit to everything because somebody out there said, if you want to be a healthy parent, if you want to be a healthy child, if you want to be a healthy whatever, go, 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 go. And one of the things I'll often say in my church, and you can feel free to quote me on this as long as you quote it correctly, is stop shooting on yourself. And this is really important. When you say, I should do this, I should do that, I should go here, I should go there, you're just creating a burden for yourself that nobody can live up to. And if you want God to do something different in your future, you got to stop living the way you did in your past. So you got to slow your life down. Spend some time with your Father and hear from Him. But this is a big one. Sometimes it requires a change of people. Have you ever noticed how many NBA players finally arrive, they make their millions of dollars, and they go bankrupt in 3 years? And you go, how? I would never do that if I were them. Forget the fact that your own monthly budget is struggling. I get it. But you think if I had their money, no way. But often what happens is they don't know how to let go of their past. So they bring their dysfunction and their unhealth with them into the future. When God's writing a new story into their life, the past depletes them of everything. And so I want you to think, whatever that thing is that you identify as the thing that God wants to change in you, how would a change of place, pace, or people give you a different perspective on things? Now, that being said, nobody walk out here and say, the pastor said I could divorce my wife and marry somebody else. It's not what I said, and it's not what I meant. We need to talk if that's what you heard. What I do mean is these things are good principles to take with you. Let's jump back into Jacob's story. So what happens is Jacob sets out for his uncle's place, and he gets somewhere along the way, and that night he has a dream. And in his dream, have you ever heard of Jacob's ladder? He sees the stairway or ladder or something coming out of heaven, and he sees angels going up and down on the ladder. And he knows this isn't a normal dream. I have lots of dreams. God just did something. God met me here. And it says in Genesis 28, verse 18, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head. Super cool. You can Google it. We don't have the actual stone, but they would often take these stones, and they would have this rounded out part, and they would place their head on it so they would have good alignment with their neck and their back. And he literally took it, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called that place Beth-El, or Bet-El. El is short for God. Bet is the Hebrew word for house. Bet-El, house of God. Though the city used to be called Luz. And the reason I want you to see that is what Jacob did is he realized, I'm in the middle of nowhere, but God has a bigger plan for my life. And no matter where you are right now, no matter what God is calling you out of, God has a bigger plan from your life than where you've been. As I was talking to Mike, who I just met back there in the corner earlier, he was making the point that it's easy to read the Bible and see where their story is going, but we have to remember they didn't know where their story is going. we do, but that should encourage us when we see where their story ends up, that maybe God isn't done with the last chapter of your story either. The next thing he says in verse 20, then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and the stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. I don't have time to get into the purpose of a tithe or the benefit of a tithe, but I want you to hang on to what's happening here. When Jacob gets this dream, he's been wondering, just because I tricked my dad, is God really with me? In light of the evil and the deception and the things that I've done, can God still love me? Can God still have a plan for me? And when God met him in this moment, there's some things that God said to him, I will be your God, and I will bring you back here, and I will restore what you have broken. I will do this in you. And Jacob's going, God, if you will do this, then I will honor you with my heart, my soul, my mind, my strength. I will put you first. I will follow after you. I will chase after you. And God gave him a dream to confirm to him, I'm going to do something through you. Again, that all points to Jesus, but so do our lives. Here's what I want you to get. When God is leading you in a new direction, it can be powerful to mark that moment as a commitment to trust God going forward. And sometimes we need those marker moments. Forgive me, I think a year ago I told part of the story, so there's nothing new under the sun. You'll get to hear part of it again, if you even remember. But I was in a really bad place. It started about 10 years ago, and it traveled up to about 7 years. Short version of a long story. My wife had just given birth to our third child. We had 3 kids under the age of 5, and we were dealing with some unique things in our home that I won't share publicly, but it was a challenge for us. At the same time, my mom was dealing with her second bout of cancer, and we weren't convinced she was going to make it. And at the same time, my church was falling apart. There were a lot of rumors and things being said about me. I made a number of mistakes, but we were losing people and dollars on a regular basis. We had to cut a fifth of our budget. We lost a fifth of our people in about an 18-month span. And the more we cut, the more people left, and it just became this snowball going downhill. And no matter how many times I tried to get on the other end of it, it felt like I just kept rolling over the top. Maybe you don't, you never worked full-time in ministry, but I'll just tell you, you have your own snowball story, I'm guessing. Most of us do at some point. When I would go to bed at night, I would see a gun going off next to my head. I'd never planned to commit suicide, but I would lay down, and I was just so depressed. I would have these dreams of my teeth shattering in my mouth. I later found out from the dentist because I was grinding so hard at night that I would picture in my dreams my teeth shattering. I didn't know how to make it stop. My elders wisely came to me and said, you're going to burn out. And you're too important to God's kingdom and to this church, so we're going to put you on a sabbatical. A sabbatical means you're going to stop working. We're not going to have any contact with you for 60 days. And I was like, oh, this is not going to go well. This church won't survive with you. It's like, well, you aren't going to survive if you keep going. And I'm so thankful my elders finally forced me to do it. I fought them on it for months. They finally said, you don't really get a choice in this anymore. We're doing this, and I'm glad they did, because it saved my life, my family. My kids, we have these pictures that scroll on Amazon on our TV. My kids will see those pictures from that season. They go, Dad, you look younger today. I want to take it as a compliment, but I don't think it is. I think I was so tired. I had these huge bags under my eyes. I just looked exhausted. I was heavier. It was just not good. So as a part of my sabbatical, and I won't go into all that, as a part of my sabbatical, I had a free ticket to go anywhere in the world because Delta messed something up, and they were telling me they were going to take my ticket away, and I was ticked, and I was not in a good place. So I was going to make Delta pay for it. I told my wife, I'm going to fly to Australia, get off the plane, look around, get back on the plane, fly back, and make them give me that seat. I'm going to fly first class, too. I had a nice ticket. Well, that's not what happened. One of my friends was a missionary in Peru, and he said, why don't you just come down and visit with me? Just stay with me. He had this orphanage he was serving at. So I did. I flew to Peru, and I took one of my friends on staff with me, and I went down there. And when I got there, part of what I just came to this conclusion, I felt like God said, Matt, you need to remember that I'm an awesome God who wants to lead you, and you don't have to be in control all the time. That's hard for me. I don't know about you. So one of the ways that I proved this is I went up to Cusco, which eventually leads to Machu Picchu, and I literally just got off the plane. I had a little bit of money on me, and I said, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't speak the language. And God just arranged the next week of my life. It was unbelievable. Someday I'd tell you the long version. But the short version, one of the things we did on that trip was a place called Rainbow Mountain. Have you ever heard of Rainbow Mountain, Peru? Let me show you a picture of Rainbow Mountain, Peru. This is what Rainbow Mountain, Peru looks like. Can you see that? That's real. It wasn't real the day that I was there because it was really cloudy and rainy. And so this is a picture I grabbed off the internet because the pictures that I have are gray and you can't really see all that. It's literal minerals in the mountains, in the middle of the Andes Mountains and the Amazon forest. You start at 8,000 or so feet, you hike to 15,000 feet in elevation, so you end up roughly 3 miles high in the air. It's a 4.5 mile hike distance-wise while traveling elevation, and I about died. The day before that, what I did is I pulled out a journal, and I literally put at the top of a page somebody who had sinned against me, hurt me, gossiped about me, lied about me, wounded me in some way, and I just put their name down. And I just had page after page. I would just write down what they did, the baggage I was carrying, the burden I was carrying. And when I got to the top, where you're standing here looking at this part of the mountain, there's like 2 mountain peaks there. There's these rock formations all over up there. Have you ever taken a big hike? Maybe you've seen them. See the rock formation. And what I did is I just pulled this rock out of here, this one right here, and I prayed over these things, and I said, God, they're yours. I can't change what others have done. I can't change what I've done. I've made my mistakes. I've made plenty of them. But God, I need to give this to you because it's destroying me and my heart and my soul and my love and my passion for you. I stuck it in there, and I stuck that rock back in there, and I buried it in there. And I thought, man, if somebody ever goes picking through these rocks up here, they're going to learn a lot of things about this guy, this pastor in this church in Avon, Indiana. If you really want to know, it might still be there 10 years later. I don't know. Anyway. When I came back down the mountain, I made this commitment that anytime anybody asked, I would simply say, when they said, hey, Matt, what do you think about this? Or what do you want to do with that? I would literally say this, I left that somewhere over the rainbow mountain. And I did. Literally, that day, as we got on the train to go back to Cusco, my friend looked at me and said, hey, Matt, what do you think we get back we should do with it? And I said, I left that over the rainbow. I needed a marker moment where I gave it to God. And I stopped trying to be God. Let him be God. That was critical for me. Now, let's come back to Jacob's story for a minute before we start to make some application into your life. What happens is, God eventually, from that moment at Bethel, he takes him to Laban's house. That's his uncle. And when he gets there, he finds out Laban's got 2 daughters. One of them is smoking hot, and her name is Rachel. And he wants to marry her. So he agrees to work so that he can marry Rachel. And he does. He works for Laban for a long time in order to marry Rachel. But Laban decides to deceive him. Sound like anybody else? And so the night that they're supposed to consummate the marriage, he finds himself not doing that with Rachel, but instead with her sister Leah. Leah has what the Bible says is weak eyes. We don't know exactly what it means. It could be a physical deformity, or it could just be she's not all that attractive. Apparently, Laban has a hard time getting Leah married. And so he tricks Jacob into marrying the wrong woman. And then Jacob, the next day, goes, what did you do? And he goes, well, I tell you what, I couldn't let you marry Rachel first, so now that you've married Leah, work for me again, and I'll let you have Rachel also. This is Jerry Springer. Man, if you thought the Bible was boring, you just aren't reading it. And if you're under 40, you don't even know who Jerry Springer is, so don't worry about it. All right. So what is going on here, though? When God wanted to get Jacob's attention, notice he sent him somebody who does the same thing to him that he's been doing to others. You should pay attention to this in your life. When God wants to do something new in you, he might just bring somebody in your life who looks or feels or sounds similar. And it's his way of revealing to you, hey, I'm trying to do something. I'm trying to get you to act differently, to change. I don't have time to walk through all of Jacob's story, but eventually, God keeps blessing Jacob like he promised he would. God protects him like he promised he would. He even keeps Laban from keeping him there longer. Even when Laban continues to try to deceive him, God is at work. And eventually, God says it's time to go home. And what about Esau? I got you, Jacob. See, after all these years, Jacob finally believes that God is with him, so he makes the journey. But he's still, if you read it, he's still trying to keep control. He sends all these people on all this. He's trying to get all the details worked out. And that night, an angel of the Lord comes down to wrestle with Jacob, physically wrestle with Jacob. Here's what's super fascinating, and I don't have time to dig real deep, so if you want to know more, email Dan. Okay, so throughout the Old Testament, there are angels, messengers of God, but there is occasionally an angel of the Lord, and he appears to speak with the authority of God, with the voice of God, and in the moment and place of God. For instance, at a different moment, at a burning bush, God begins to speak through the burning bush to Moses. Moses, Moses, take off your shoes. You're standing on holy ground. The next thing you know, the angel of the Lord speaks and speaks with the voice of God. How is it there are two powers in heaven? This is all the groundwork that the Old Testament laid. So when Jesus showed up on the scene, it should not have been a surprise. And many of the Jews of Jesus' day saw it and got it and understood it. God was always a triune God. Now, I'm not going to go into the Trinity. I don't have any more time to go any deeper, but this is one of those moments. See, God told Moses, you can't see me and survive. Nobody can. You can't handle the truth, Moses. But this night, God shows up and wrestles with Jacob. And I'm convinced, this is what we call a theophany. I'm convinced this is Jesus wrestling with Jacob. This is important because they wrestled. It says they wrestled all night long, and this angel of the Lord could not subdue Jacob. Could God subdue you if he wanted to? Oh, really? How long has God been trying to get you to let go of something from your past? You still wrestling with him? Or is he winning yet? See, we read these things and we don't know how to make sense of them, but then we read them and somebody goes, and you go, oh, that's me. So the angel pops Jacob's hip out of socket, literally. But he won't let go still. And look at chapter 32, verse 26. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Remember who blessed him? His daddy, but it wasn't supposed to be his. Whose was it? His brothers. Just somebody bless me. Somebody see me. Somebody watch out for me. The man asked him, what is your name? His response, deceiver. That's what it means. I'm the one who trips everybody up. Then the man answered, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. And that's where the entire nation of Israel gets named in that moment. You will no longer be deceiver. You are now one who wrestles with God and man and overcomes. Wow. See, Jacob's new identity is found in who God says he is. And that's a game changer. Your identity is not what you did. Your identity is not what somebody else did to you. Your identity, stop listening to the lies of this world. Your identity is not the thing you like doing, enjoy doing, want to do. Your identity is who God says you are. If you jump into chapter 35, verse 14, it says that Jacob set up a stone pillar at the place where God talked with him. And he poured out a drink offering on it. He also poured oil on it. And Jacob called the place where God had talked with him Bethel. What I'm convinced is happening is God was doing a new thing in Jacob, but God had to spend years convincing Jacob that he is doing it, and he was doing it, and he was with him. I am with you. If you know your New Testament, do you remember the last thing Jesus said to the disciples? I am with you always, to the very end of the age. So when it feels like you're short on resources, and you're short on energy, and you're short on time, when it feels like you screwed it up beyond all measure, when you feel unloved, unlovable, unworthy, I am with you always. You can't change that. God is faithful when we are faithless, Paul says. Now, what I want you to take away from that is this. What is the thing in your life that you need to let go of to move forward into the story that God has for you? Do you know it? Is God whispering it to you right now? Remember that couple who couldn't get pregnant? They gave me their permission to use this story. So after hours of meeting and talking, I just identified in them two things are going on. They carry a lot of shame, and they want to be in control, but yet God is trying to be in control. God has a story for them. I don't know what it is. I don't pretend to know what it is. He didn't reveal that to me, but I know that they're struggling with letting God have control. So because of their financial situation, they aren't flying to Peru to climb Rainbow Mountain. I wish everybody could do that. But here's something I learned from a Christian counselor, and it is extremely effective, and you might want to try this. So what I encouraged them to do is I said, why don't you guys go home separately? Don't do this together, separately. Just journal out on a piece of paper the things that you feel like you need to give to God. Then come together and share those. Like have a date night. Just talk about them. Hear each other's hurts. Cry together. Laugh together. Share those together. Then I want you to take those and I want you to find a park with water. It could be a stream or a lake. I want you to take a bucket with you. I want you to look on the ground and just find rocks that seem to represent those things you wrote on the page. God, I really want a baby, but I don't know why you aren't giving it to me. God, I'm hurt and I'm angry at you. I'm mad at myself. I'm mad at my spouse. Whatever the rock is. And you just pick one up every time it represents that thing. It's amazing how God will do this. The Holy Spirit will move in you. You'll be like, holy cow, that rock is perfect. It just seems to fit. And you just load up your bucket. Then you go to the water's edge. And this is going to take time. And one by one, you pray over that thing. And you throw it into the water. It is amazingly helpful because what you're doing is you're marking a new day, a new change, a new path, a new perspective. God, from this day forward, I left that somewhere over the rainbow. I got this message from them. I reached out and said, hey, have you guys done it yet? And they said, hi, Matt. I wanted to let you know yesterday we went to Shade State Park, threw our rocks in the river. There's a spot on the hike called Lover's Leap. So we say that we left it at Lover's Leap. Thank you for telling us about this. We already feel a weight lifted knowing it's all in God's hands and out of our control. Here's the picture they sent me, if that wasn't already up there. Here's the picture of Lover's Leap. This is the moment, the place where they marked this change. I reached out to them a few weeks after that and said, how's it going? They said, we still have to remind ourselves that we did this, but it has been so helpful, so healing, to say we gave it to God. We gave it to God. And I want you to give it to God. This is exactly what I think Paul's wrestling with. I promise I'm really close to the end here. In Philippians chapter 3, verse 12, Paul says this, not that I have already obtained all this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. I press on. But when I read the Bible, it drives me crazy. I can't just read it. I need to know what's happening. So when he says, not that I have already obtained all this, what is the all this he's referring to? Well, it actually is the verses right before that. So let's read those real quick. He says this in verse 10. I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. So what is he saying? I've not yet obtained all this. The all this is, I want to know Christ. I want to suffer with him. I want to go through things and see his faithfulness in my life, that no matter how hard things get, I will yet raise from the dead with him. But then he goes on and he says at verse 13, brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. Like, this is Paul the apostle. Like, if he hasn't arrived yet, which one of us has? In other words, this is going to be a journey throughout your life of learning to embrace the cross as God's way for us. And he says, so there's one thing I do, forget what's behind and strain forward towards what is ahead. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. So what do you need to take away from this? Forget what is behind. I press forward with what is ahead. Put your behind in the past. Here's what I'm not saying. If you've been sinning and hurting people and nobody knows about it, well, just wake up tomorrow and forget about it. You know, you probably need to have a hard conversation with people you love and ask for their forgiveness. You know what I'm not saying? I'm not saying if somebody abused you terribly, especially say when you were a child, you know, you should just forget about it. That's not what I'm saying. Jesus would be ticked at me for saying that. Remember, Jesus said, anybody who harms a child, it will be better for them to have a millstone, that's a huge, large concrete stone, tied around their neck, thrown into the sea, than to stand before God on Judgment Day after hurting a child. God takes very seriously children. However, that same God says, forgive others as I have forgiven you. So God desires to heal your heart by leading you both into forgiving and to receiving forgiveness. And this is how we deal with shame. We can't change what's done, but we can confront it. We can confess it. We can turn from it. We can forgive others. We can seek forgiveness for others. And what we find is healing and hope and health like we've never, ever known. I'm going to cut my last story just because time's sake I'm almost done. But let me make my very, very, very last point. God desires a close and intimate relationship with you. A close and intimate one. He wants to know you. He wants to provide for you, protect you, and he wants you to know him. So everything I'm saying about the past, it's coming from a place of love. Jesus promises he will lead you into. So trust him. Trust him. Let me pray over you, and then Jack's going to come up and take us into communion.